Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm back after a week away. And thank you so much for everybody who sent concerns about my home renovation or my home repairs. It wasn't really an emergency so much as timing, and we had construction workers working here, asking a lot of questions, making a lot of noise, and so it wasn't really conducive to doing my live stream last week. So apologies for that, but I'm back, and this week we're going to be talking about painting grasses and tall grasses, and this is a technique that will also work very well for things like hay or straw or anything with that type of texture where you've got like multiple sort of linear lines that are overlapping each other. So let's get into it. Just move on over here to my demo. All right, so I'm just going to be working on, this is a piece of 140-pound cold press paper arches that I have taken from a block. I have something on the back of it, so we don't really need to see that, but I'm just going to zoom out a little bit here so you can see the whole thing. I'm going to be using some masking fluid for this. So I'm going to be using PBO drawing gum. I'm going to be using one of my favorite tools for masking is this dip pen, which you can get these on Amazon, online, lots of places you can get these. And it's just the old-fashioned dip in the inkwell kind of pen. This one's quite pointed, but you can get various nibs and things like that. So the paints I'm going to be using are pretty much DaVinci Watercolor, but I am using an assortment of different brands in here, but they're all professional quality, and most are transparent or at least semi-transparent. So most of my paints in there are on the transparent side. I don't use a lot of opaque colors. So speaking of opaque, if you were doing grasses, the grasses themselves are usually lighter than the shadows behind. I mean, that makes sense, right? Now, you could be taking out your gouache or your opaque watercolor, and you could be putting in those grasses using that. But it doesn't have that same sort of sunlight glow or anything like that that you might want to achieve. So by using the masking fluid, we'll be able to use transparent color and have the white of the paper coming through that color to illuminate it a little bit more. And it'll allow us to work and get our greens a little bit fresher and brighter. The thing with greens is, especially sunlight greens, is that they are a little bit on the warm side. So they're a little yellow. And if you start using gouache or something like that, there's a lot of white. Do you know white is a very cool color, and it almost comes across as gray on your paper? So by using the white of the paper, you're going to get a much nicer effect. Okay, so let me just get the top off my masking fluid here. Just reaching for a paper towel. It's a bit, sometimes they get a bit gooey, so get that out of there. Okay, so your masking fluid, I don't want to shake this and make a lot of bubbles in it, but I can stir it a little bit. I can, if I want to use the handle of my brush, I can stir it that way. But with the dip pen, you don't need to have any soap on it. If you were using the bristles of your brush, the bristles of your brush would need to have soap on them because the masking fluid would stick to this very easily, and then you would have kind of a stuck brush, a gooey, hard brush. So you put soap on your brush, but you don't need to for this tool because it'll wipe off very easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with some of my grasses in the foreground, and I will go through the stages, and every time I do another stage, I'm going to like I'll do the first stage here, then I'll do the second stage and so on. I'll work my way across, and by the end, you'll get the idea, I think. So very often if you're looking at grasses, you're going to see lots of little like tall ones that are sticking up. So let's do a couple of tall ones here. And they usually have like the little seeds on the top. So I just, make a couple of little strokes together to get that effect. And they will crisscross and lots of different things. So let's get a few of these tall, wispy grasses on here first. And just like most things in watercolor, like I almost made them all in a row here, so I need to add in a few others that are not evenly spaced or the same height or anything like that. Grasses crisscross. They crisscross quite often, actually. Unless you've got the wind blowing and they're all sort of leaning over in one direction, they're going to kind of stick up and be all different heights and directions and things like that. So this works so well because it's such a fine tip, and it can give you those long skinny lines. So I'm going to work my way across here, just doing lots of this type of thing. I'll try and go quickly because we don't have a lot of time on Wednesday mornings, but I'm going to work my way across the whole page so that I have some of the same effect on everything as I go along. This masking fluid is fairly new, so it's pretty fresh, thin. If you're using a tool like this and you've got very thick, gummy masking fluid, it's probably time for you to replace it. As it gets older, it gets thicker and gummy. I never really buy a big bottle of masking fluid because I don't go through it fast enough before it starts going bad. Or, its life expectancy is over. All right, so let's do a couple of other little things here. Maybe you've got some plants that have little leaves on them or something like that. Something like that. So different types of grasses, right? Don't make them all exactly the same. That's kind of a little bit boring, right? So in nature, you're going to get all different kinds of plants. Sometimes you just have grasses. Just the lines. Now, as I'm making this, I'm actually pressing a little bit on this nib so that I get this tapering off effect. I think I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so you can see what I'm doing a little bit closer. Now that you've kind of seen the overall look, I'm going to give you something a little closer. And another nice tool for doing these kinds of things is a glass pen. A glass pen is it's a kind of a beautiful instrument. They're very decorative sometimes. It's like hand blown sometimes, and they have this little swirly pattern towards the end where the ink or the paint or the masking fluid will sit in the little grooves of this swirl on the end, and that will allow you to draw with it quite nicely. It just sort of feeds the tip. I have one. After I've done this, I can show you that instrument. I think I have it nearby, if I'm not mistaken. It's a great day for painting here. We're seeing the tail end of hurricane barrel, and it is a very gray day out there. Lots of rain. Had lots of rain in the night. I had to check that my power settings and my mic didn't go off again. I'm going to do a few more of these sort of bent over grasses, these ones that are a different kind of plant variety, right? Now, I haven't shown this process before, but I use it quite often. It's very helpful. One of the reasons I haven't shown it in the past is because it can sometimes be a little bit time-consuming, but I feel that it's really worth it for the overall effect. Imagine this. You've got grass, little blades of grass, and in between are shadows. But if you're building it up, let's say I see a lot of people, and they'll take something like a fan brush or something like that, and they will do their grasses. And yes, a fan brush works wonderfully for making grasses. However, the odd thing about that texture is that you get the lighter is behind. Because, of course, if you're painting on top of a wash, whatever you're painting on top of the wash is darker, typically darker than the wash itself, because you're adding another layer of transparent color. Well, there's something very strange about having light illuminating between the grasses when it really should be shadow. So you're kind of flipping the values there. It should be dark between the grasses, and the grasses themselves should be lighter. And so that's why this process works, to give you something a little bit more convincing, I think. Let's stick another type of thing in here. I don't know what. I'll just do a little seed pods of some kind here, just to make something a little bit interesting. And I really don't have to slow down and fuss and spend a lot of time making this look perfect, because you know what grasses look like. They're always very clustered and quite busy. Let's see if I can get my way across the whole page here, because I want to work in those stages, as I said. And so I want to make sure I get all of this in here. I find that I have to spend the most time just working on those top grasses. That's where I seem to have to slow down and get the shapes right. So I'm going to do a few taller ones here. It's these foreground grasses that need the attention. Of course, the ones in the background, like the distant field or area that you're working in, they don't need the same sort of attention. I just smudged my hand through that. It's okay, we'll make it a bigger grass right there. All right, meanwhile, I'm just going to come in and put in some more. Whoop, there's another. You know what? That's going to be a wildflower right there. Put in a couple more of those. If you did have wildflowers within this area, this would be a very good time to mask those in as well, because the wildflowers are probably going to be white or yellow or red or purple or something like that. It's definitely going to be a different color than the green of the grasses or the brown of the grasses. So you would need to keep that part of the paper protected so that you can actually add those colors back in afterwards. So I'm just going to work along here and try to get a few little suggestions of wildflowers in here. Be careful of falling into the trap of spacing everything the same and making it the same size, same spacing, same. It's just something we do naturally. I don't know why we do it. We just do. Would I ever put a warm wash on my paper before masking the grass in? Yes, that's actually a very good point. It depends on what I'm doing. Yes, I would definitely do that in certain situations. However, the example that was on the thumbnail that I showed here, that was an image that a commission that I had done, and there was blue grass or blue water and with waves in it and so on, rocks and various different things in the background. So in that case, if I did the green wash, I'd have, in between these spaces, for example, I would I wouldn't want green. I would want the blue of the water or something like that. So that's one other thing I'll probably show here. That really is this is kind of a big blob here. What I might do here is I might take that off. So it's just a matter of let it dry and then pull it off. It's not the end of the world. If you make a mistake in your masking fluid, you can always just let it dry and take it off. Now, I had showed this to somebody yesterday, in fact, and they had never seen this technique done before. So I thought, well, that would be a really good thing to share with people because, I can't be the only one who's doing this, but I'm sure that many of you would not have approached your grasses this way. So I'm all about sharing some of the weird and wonderful techniques that I've sort of developed over the years. All right, so I've got a lot of grasses on there. That's a good start. That's going to preserve those light areas of my grasses. Getting back to your question, David, about would I ever put a warm wash on my paper before masking the grass? Sure, I could do that. But when I'm finished, I can also easily just run a slightly damp brush over these areas, and that fills in those grasses, not to the point where they're going to be dark, but where they will actually fill in and give me a little bit of color in those otherwise white areas. So I'm going to, I would not recommend this, unless you're doing a live stream yourself, but I'm going to see if I can speed this up a little bit with a little bit of warm air. I'm going to hold this dryer very far away so that it's getting the air, but not all the heat, because heat and masking fluid are not good friends. If you heat your masking fluid too much, what can happen is you can bake it onto your paper. So I don't have a reference that I'm using for this. Grasses are pretty much grasses no matter where you go. But I mean, if you were working from a reference, of course, you're not going to be looking at every blade of grass, for heaven's sake. That's kind of a little bit excessive. So does the pen scratch the paper? If you're pressing too hard, it could, yes. While I'm drying this, I can probably locate my glass pen. That's not it. Let's see. This is my glass pen. You can see it's kind of a very attractive instrument. It's got a little protective tube on the end. And you can see the little swirly pattern on the tip, or towards close to the tip. And those are like little grooves that hold the paint or the masking fluid or whatever. And then, of course, gravity pulls it down towards that nice fine tip. So it's kind of a nice instrument to use. You'd really have to load that up if you wanted sort of a continuous flow. But it works quite well. So you would take your brush and you would, take your paint or your whatever and load it on there like that. Masking fluid, you could just dip this straight into your bottle. I don't want that to get too hot, so I am going to stop drying that for a moment. This one big blob right here, this is going to take a little bit of time to dry, but some of these even look wet, but that's only because it's got a lot of latex and things in it. So the latex always has that sort of glossy, shiny look to it. I don't know if you can see, like some of these look like they're wet, but they're not. So, but this one, you can tell that this one's still wet because there's two colors of blue in it. And the two colors of blue tell you that the middle of that is not dry. Let me show you this close. It is too soon to start painting because the middle of that is definitely wet. You can see the two blues. It will turn a little bit darker once it's dry. All right. So I don't really want to wait too long. I'm going to, and since I want to kind of take that off anyway, I'm just going to blot off the excess here. You can see that was definitely wet. It left a hole. And I'm going to dry this so that I can remove it. Might be kind of an interesting thing to leave it, but my experience tells me that that's probably not the case. So I'm just going to take this, this is a rubber cement pickup tool, and I'm just going to pull that off. There we go. All right, so if I want to add more grasses there, I can just add them at this point. So if you make something on there that doesn't go right, it's not the end of the world. Just take it off and redo it. The heat made my paper curl, which is one other reason why so often I am taping down my paper, which I should have done, I suppose. All right. Clean my tool off, my dip pen. I'm going to put the lid back on my masking fluid. If you forget to put the lid back on your masking fluid, you're exposing a lot of air to it. And since masking fluid has such a short life, as it is, short shelf life, I would get that lid back on there as soon as possible. Mainly because the it'll start setting up, right? It'll start getting thick. I'm going to take this little blob off here too. Okay, that's enough of that. Get that last little bit dry, and then we're off to the races as far as getting our paints out. Will I be visiting Alabama when I do selection for the upcoming Watercolor Society of Alabama's upcoming show? No, unfortunately, I will not be in Alabama. I am going to be doing all of that jurying online. So I would love to be there. I would love to see the paintings in person because I think they always look better in person, but that isn't always possible geographically. So now I'm just cooling that off for a second, and it's time for me to start painting. So I'm going to take a nice, let me see here. I'm going to pick a nice soft bristle brush. This is a number 7. I was actually looking for my 10. There's my 10. All right, so I've got a fairly good sized brush. This is a squirrel hair brush that holds lots and lots of water or paint. So I'm going to use this. Now, the process for this is to start with your lighter values to begin with. If you've ever seen the technique of pouring, it is similar in concept anyway. So it's a similar concept where you start light, you add masking, add a layer, add more masking, and so on. I'm just looking for a nice liner type brush. So I'm going to use, I found one here. I'm going to use a liner type brush, or a script liner type brush, nice long bristle brush, and this big one, because I need to put in a wash, but at the same time I want to create a few grasses with this. So I'm going to I'm going to use Aureolin, Cobalt Blue, and I'm going to keep it fairly diluted so that I have a light value. However, I don't want to make it overly light because of one thing. When you put masking fluid over top of a painted area, it will lighten that area. I need to make sure I have enough mixed here because I've got a fair area to cover. And this seems like a lot of prep to start, but it is worthwhile. So I'm going to start off with this nice light wash, and it does not have to be a consistent color. This is kind of one trap we all fall into. It's just like how we space everything the same. You also have the tendency to treat your washes like perfect smooth washes. They can vary in color. You see I've got some areas that are a little bit more yellow and some that are a little bit more green. And I'm just going to take my brush here and incorporate some strokes towards the top that are similar to the other ones. And this is quite a wet consistency. Okay, quickly getting back to my other brush so I can keep going here. It's a really wet puddle and I'm really filling my brush. I went A little crazy with the blue in there, but that's okay. I can work with that. Get some more yellow in. And you can see the variety that I'm putting in here. I'm just using 2 colors at the moment, but there's no reason that you couldn't also put in some, other colors, maybe some raw sienna, burnt sienna, different, gamboge instead of aureolin, or a different blue. Mix it up. Whatever your reference picture dictates that you might have there is what you can throw in. I'm going to do a fairly standard green meadow kind of thing. All right, so I have a fairly even wash, and I don't mean that it's even in terms of it all being the same. I mean that it's, I don't have a lot of dark in there, a lot of different things. I'm using cobalt blue as well as my aureolin. Now my aureolin in DaVinci is a mixture, so it is not, the aureolin that you would get in, say, another brand, unless they have the same mixture. But excuse me, it is a mixture. So I'm incorporating some of these long grass-like tips in with my masked off areas. So I'm going to dry this. Which won't take too long because it's a fairly quick wash. I didn't go too wet with this. I mean, I was fairly wet. What I mean is I didn't keep applying a lot. Looks like I have a dark area in there. Just blot that off. Okay, you want to make sure that this wash is nice and dry before going on to the next step. Okay, so this is dry. I'm going to let that cool down for a second. I'm going to leave this left-hand side here just to show you, so that at the end of this demonstration, you're going to see each step and the progression. When you join the middle of or the end of a demonstrations, kind of like you don't know what happened during the process, right? So this is going to give you sort of a visual of every step. So I'm going to go back to my masking fluid and my pen. Make sure this is dry. It's a little damp here. I'm just going to hit this with a little bit more heat just to dry this quickly. Cool it a little bit. And I'm going to take out my masking fluid in my pen again. So I'm going to start about here, and I'm going to begin. Let's I don't have a piece of paper handy, but I've got paper towel. So I'm just going to cover this first section as I work on this. And I'm going to apply more of the masking. Don't need to worry as much about all of those little seeds on the end. I mean, you can certainly do that. It all depends on your reference picture and whether you actually need that. I'll put a couple in just for kicks. here. And I need to work across the whole picture again. Now this can go a lot faster now that I'm kind of got the swing of things and I've got a wash down there. I can easily see what I'm doing. The one thing that is a bit of a downside about using the pen is it can give you slight variation, but you might also want to use a bit of a little bit of a brush in there as well, so that you get a variety of widths of your grasses. Sometimes you have all very skinny, tall grasses, but not always. Sometimes you get, plants in there and things like that, or a different type of grass mixed in. So I'm not going over anything that I did previously other than, maybe crisscrossing. I'm pretty much working in between all of these shapes, all these previous masking. It's a little bit of a process, but sometimes when you're going to get an occasional image that you want to paint, and it's actually going to show the grasses, and the grasses are an important part of the overall effect. So I would certainly advocate for simplifying your grasses as much as possible in your landscapes, but every once in a while you're going to have a situation where you really want to show more detail in these foreground grasses. As you go off into the distance, I would not be doing this sort of detail. That would be a little bit crazy. But you could certainly do this in the foreground. And that also, I did a demonstration a couple of weeks ago about creating atmospheric perspective. And speaking of perspective, it applies to skies and trees and grasses and meadows and seas and lakes. It applies to so many different things. I mean, the world's a vast place. And when you're looking, you've got things that are close to you, and then you have things that are far away from you. So you want to be able to create that illusion in paint. And to do that, you want to have some things in the foreground in focus, more contrast, more detail, more color intensity. And as you recede, they can get a little bit more faded, a little bit more blue. It is, yeah, Karen's saying, is this similar to negative painting but with masking? Yes. If I were to negative paint around all these grasses, I would surely go insane. It would be such an incredible task. So this certainly simplifies things. Can I comment on pros and cons of naturally drying versus drying with heat gun, especially in regards to masking fluid? Yeah, I would, whenever possible, I would let it just dry naturally. It's a good time to go grab a coffee, and just step away for a few minutes, let it dry naturally. The problem with heat and masking fluid is that the heat can sometimes bake it onto your paper, and that baking onto your paper means it doesn't come off. Ask me how I know this. I know this because it has happened to me, where I have left it on too long or used heat to dry it, and live to regret it. So I would suggest, as much as possible, use fresh masking fluid and also to let it dry naturally. Yeah, it does require patience. That's when it's really good to have a second painting that you're working on, something that you can fiddle, or a sketchbook, or keep yourself occupied so that you don't jump in. Now, having said that, I'm going to not listen to my own advice here. I'm going to try to speed this up. Now, I'm only doing this because I have tested this with this masking fluid, this paper, and as long as I'm not leaving it on there a long time, I can take it off. Now, this masking fluid I just bought. It is really fluid. It's in good shape, pretty new. So it's not going to be as much of a problem as if I were using really old masking fluid. Elizabeth's asking, I'm not very familiar with live sessions. Is there a list of supplies I use? Curious especially about the tool for applying the masking fluid. I have the glass ones, but not that pen looking one. Yeah, it is a dip pen. You can buy the holder and the different various nibs separately, but often the nibs come in a set, and you can, like this nib actually comes out. You know, I could actually pull that out, although I've got it jammed in there pretty well, so it's not going to be very easy for me to take out. I've got just a couple of blobs. I've got a blob here and I've got a blob here that are going to take a little longer to dry. The one thing about the pen is it generally will, like most of these lines, will not take very long at all to dry because they're so, you know, the masking fluid's been applied so thin. But sometimes you get a blob and you get a lot on there. That actually is dry now. Right. I thought it was still wet. I think it's wet in the middle of it, but that should be okay. All right, so I stopped here, and this is where I'm going to apply my color next. So I'm going to go another shade darker. At this point, same tools. I can use the same coloring. I can start thinking about getting it a little darker. I can go a little more blue if I want to. If I want to change it up and go a different kind of green, I could do that at this stage. But what if I took some of my sap green and mixed that in there? That's a little bit of a different green. I could come in here. All right, so from here, I'm going to start putting in some different greens. A little bit darker value. Still trying to keep that the integrity of this upper edge. I want to keep that. I don't want to come along with my brush and make a solid line like that because grasses just don't end that way. Oop. Got a little ambitious there and got some little spots in the background. Nice wet color so that it fills in nicely. The one thing when you get a lot of masking fluid on here, you may find that it can sometimes pool between the little lines that are crisscrossing and things like that. So you may have to take your brush, or I've seen some people even use a finger to smudge that out and get it a little bit more even. But I'm just going to use this here. I'm going to take my liner brush. This it's a long bristle, and the reason it's good to use this kind of a brush is because it holds a lot. So I can create those longer grasses here like this. I like using a liner brush rather than, say, a fan brush. The thing I don't like about using the fan brush too much is the fan brush kind of lines up all the stroke. Like they all go this way or they all go that way kind of thing. So I like that I can sort of crisscross them a little bit more here. And grasses sometimes flip over, you know, they do one of these. Throw a few of those in there. All right, so you can see stage 1, stage 2. I'm going to have to dry this again. Well, like I said, this is kind of a patient process that you have to work on. Hello everyone that's arriving a little bit late. It is the grayest day ever here. It is like you need all the lights on in the house kind of thing. It's so dark out. It's just dark and dreary. Good day for painting. Keeping this moving. If you have to use a dryer, I can't imagine a reason why you would have to use a dryer unless you were doing a live stream. But if you have to use a dryer, I would keep it moving. Don't let any one area start to get overheated. Give it a break every once in a while. You know, you don't have to keep going. You can stop and let that cool down. Then hit it again, which I think I'm going to have to. I can feel a little dampness coming through there. Okay, that's cooling down, but I can feel the dampness, so I know it's not fully dry yet. Yeah, Joyce says, I left my masking fluid on too long, made a mess of my paper. Yeah, and when you have an older masking fluid and you leave it on too long, and especially the type of paper you're using, I would definitely recommend experimenting with your masking fluid on whatever type of paper you're using. One of the reasons I'm using Arches is because it is well reputed to be one of the most tough papers, most durable papers. Yes, it's pricey. It is pricey paper, but for the cost of my time and effort, I'm going to spend the money. So, all right, I'm going to leave that to cool just a little bit, and I'm back to the masking process. So at this point, I'm going to start here. So I'm going to leave those two sections, and I'm going to start doing more masking here. And at some point during this process, I'm going to have more masking on my paper than paper showing. And you can repeat this process as many times as you wish to create the effect that you're looking for. I had one student who did a whole lot of grass, and she spent forever, but my gosh, she had the most wonderful grass, and it was actually straw in her case. So she did it with to create the straw effect, which of course is done in a similar way, other than instead of using greens, you're using golds and things like that. And her strokes were not quite as long and tapered as what I'm doing here. They're a little bit more chunky, I guess, for lack of a better word. A little bit more chunky because straw is sort of flat and straight, lots of sort of broken things, you know, like bends like that when it comes to straw. Let's do a few more of those. Those are kind of cool. And the goal here, where I'm heading with this, is I really want to get to the point where I have some real good darks established in within my grass, but not the grass itself. The grass itself isn't really dark. It's the shadows between. So this is very much like a negative approach, like a painting, applying the masking fluid to reserve the light areas and then painting the parts in between. I want to keep a few up here too. And you notice that not every grass starts at the bottom, goes all the way to the end. Sometimes you only see sort of the tips of the grasses in the areas tucked in behind. Hope you'll stick around to the end, because I think I would like to show how I'm going to continue this meadow, but without all the detail, right? This looks great, but it kind of looks like a wall of grass. And I think at the end I'm going to add in a little bit more meadow behind this, or a little bit more of a field of grass behind this. Wiping off my tool, get the lid back on my masking fluid. Don't leave it open. All right, so we need to let that dry. This is long, thin grass. As I said, you can definitely use a brush for this. I would recommend a brush that's got a fairly decent tip. Don't try to do all your masking fluid with a horrible brush. I have masking brushes that I keep in good condition. I will, if they get clogged with masking fluid, you know, if you start getting masking fluid clinging to your bristles, you can always use Goo Gone, that, you know, the adhesive label remover that you can work into your brush, and that'll remove a lot of your masking fluid that has dried in there. Sometimes it takes a little while to work it out, but you can get your brush back into perfect shape again. This is one that was absolutely completely clogged, but you see it has a fairly decent point on it. And it's just a really cheap brush. I don't even know where I got it. The name's all actually worn off. It's all chipped off, but I've used this a million times and it still has a fairly decent point. So I can get the nice tapered look even when I'm using a brush for this. Somebody asked earlier about my materials. I don't have a list of materials for my for each demo because they're all different. But my general list of materials is listed on my website. That's my website right there. And I believe I have a link to it also underneath this video. If I don't, I'll check at the end and make sure that it's there. All right, so that's cooling off now, and I'm going to skip over now. I'm going to cover the first two steps that I did. And here's where I'm going to continue my washes with even darker green. So if I continue using Aureolin and Cobalt Blue, which is what I started with, I will get a darker green, but it's going to be a darker green, the exact same green. If I start introducing a little bit of Payne's gray to that, I can start getting darker much faster. So I've added a little bit of a dark green, a little bit of Payne's gray to that green to make it extra dark. And you can see each layer that I add on is making this darker and darker. Nice wet wash there, and switch to my script liner so that I can add in some dark grasses along the top so I don't have a weird top to my grasses. I need to get a few grass-like strokes in there. Okay, so it's time to dry that layer. Keep that dryer moving. Don't let it sit in one spot and overheat that masking. Allow that to cool a minute and we're back to masking. I'm going to eventually get to the point where there's more masking on here than there is white paper. Or not white paper, but paper. All right, I'm going to work in this section. You can see how much faster I can go now that I've got lots on here. When I did the beginning and I had to be a little bit careful with each of these little tips and things like that, that was sort of the slow, tedious part. And I'm sure at the beginning you thought, oh my gosh, I can't do my graphs like that. It's too tedious. But, you can get a lot more free with this afterwards. Good idea to knock the big blobs off your masking fluid before you do that. got to stick around to the end because that's when the masking fluid comes off and you can see the fruits of your labor. Oh, yeah. Yes, Karen, you're exactly right. Karen says the big reveal when all the masking fluid is removed. Yes, that's exactly right. So you never know exactly how it's going to turn out. I have done this a couple of times and it's like, oh, I put down my paint color a little bit too light. And then I didn't have quite the darks that I was really looking for. So just remember when you put masking fluid on your paint, it will remove a little bit of that color as well. So you're not necessarily going to have as strong a color as what it looks like right now. The whole thing is going to look a lot lighter. Plus, every coat that you put on, I mean, every layer that gets darker is also putting paint on top of masking fluid. So overall, it looks nice and dark. However, by the end, it's going to look extra dark. It won't look that dark when the masking fluid comes off. Oh, thanks for checking, Vicky. She says the link is in the description. Thank you. All right, so let's get this dry. Now, masking fluid is never going to come off until you have painted what's behind. Before I remove masking, would you then paint in your background and sky? Absolutely, that's what I was just commenting on. Now let me just, while you're mentioning the sky and so on, if you have a sky that is lighter than your grass, you don't need to mask that. There's no need to mask that. The grass is going to be darker than the light colored sky. However, in the example that I had in my thumbnail, you could see that I had dark cliffs, dark water in behind very light grass. There was, I believe, this was a commission that was given to me, and I believe there was probably some cloud, intermittent cloud, but there was definitely sun on those grasses, and they looked very yellowy and very light compared to the background. So this is where this technique would really come in handy. Okay, so that masking fluid is dry. I'm going to put this over here, cover what I've done so far. You don't really need to do that. You don't need to do that at all because you're not doing a demonstration. But I'm going to use Aureolin and Payne's Gray, which gives me a really deep green. And you can see that this is really starting to show the depth and the layers of grass here. And we don't want to leave a squared off top like that, so I'm going to pull a little bit up with this brush, and I'm going to continue with some of my script liner. So that I don't have that weird solid line there. All right. So we've done 1, 2, 3. This is our fourth layer. You could go so far as to doing 5 or 6 or 7 or as many as you want to, for that matter. Welcome, Kathy. Take a little bit, the excess paint off. Okay, allow that to cool. And I'm going to do one last application of masking fluid. Waiting for my paper to cool a little bit. By the time I'm done all of this, if I feel like there are some darker plants or something like that, that can easily be painted on top. Couple more, and then let's get this rolling here. All right, that's enough. Get the lid on. Wipe off my tool. Okay, let's get that dry. Add one more layer of dark. This time I'm going to go very dark, so I'm going to use a lot of Payne's Gray. Right here. I don't need to go quite as high with the darks. The darkest darks are usually right at the ground level, so I won't go quite as high with the darks there, but still don't want to draw a straight line across the top. All right, let's dry that, and I'm going to move on to painting a continuation of the meadow. Got to point it away for a minute so it doesn't heat up too much. And it looks like I've got an awful lot of dark on there, but remember that there's an awful lot of light green that's protected with that masking. Okay, so that, it looks a little funny, only to me, up close, because you see like a little shine on it from the masking fluid, but there's a lot of masking fluid on there now. Okay, so let's talk about the background. When you're doing the background, let's say we want to make a continuing meadow. If I had, for example, a lake in there, I could paint in my lake, and let's paint in some lake here. Let's do cobalt blue. I won't make it too pretty of a blue. I'll make it more, put a little raw sienna in it. That'll dull it down a little bit. And I would paint in my lake. My lakes, oddly enough, I would bring down like this into my grasses. I don't need to work too much at that, but let's just say that's a lake in there, okay? So we'll put a lake on this side. The rest of this, I want to make this a meadow. Now, this isn't going to end up being like a nice painting or anything like that because I've got all these weird stages that I have in the foreground grass to show my technique. But I do want to show you how to make the background sort of integrate with this high detail foreground. So I'm going to go back to some of my earlier color. Let's take my cobalt blue and areolan. And I'm going to start putting in, and I'm going to be using fairly fresh color because when we see the rest of the grasses in the background, we're seeing basically the tops of the grasses, right? We're not seeing down here in the bottom of the grasses or anything like that. We're not seeing that. So I want to get rid of the white paper here so I can bring down some of this bright fresh green down into my existing grass. And as I go further away, let's take some of that blue, we'll dull it down a little bit. Because things as they go away, they're going to get lighter, they're going to get cooler. So let's take a little bit more blue and fade that away a little bit. I'm not taking the time to make that pretty or anything, but and you might have something else beyond this meadow. I don't know. Every reference picture is going to be a different set of of challenges, right? So there is my continuing meadow. However, it's too flat. It's too smooth of a wash. So the trick here is get rid of that smoothness. How about if I just hit it with some various color? How about we knock in some bluer color in there? Even just some just plain water. You know what I like to use for this? This is where I like to use my fan brush, but I don't use it in the way that you think. As I take a little fan brush and I put it in my water, and I hit the fan brush to give me a little bit of variation there. I might even use it this way so that they're not all circles. I can take a little color and tap it in a kind of a horizontal mode. Maybe you do have something dark in your distance. Let's just make that go away. Just to give the illusion of a continuing meadow. A little suggested texture without actually painting every grass or anything like that. I could hint at a few grasses that are between the really sharp ones and the really faded ones. I could hint at a little bit of that. With a slightly drier paint. Let's see if I can get something with less water in it. Blot it on my paper towel here. I can hint at a few grasses. I think I need to go a little darker. You could hint at that transition. There we go. All right, so it looks like a mess right now, but let's dry this. Okay, so with my rubber cement pickup eraser or pickup tool, I can start removing my masking. And you can see how effective it is to have that masking fluid against that smooth background, how I'm able to create that illusion. But the problem here, of course, is that that masking fluid is white, leaving white paper. So I have to come back in and add a little bit in there. But you'll notice as I remove the masking fluid, how many different greens are starting to appear. Now this was only the second stage. So as I move my way across, you're going to see this effect becoming more and more effective, right? So if you do 2 layers, it's okay. It's works pretty nice. Run your hand across to see if you've missed anything. You can usually feel it with your hand when you've left any masking fluid behind. Okay, lots of white paper showing at this point. Still bits of masking fluid here and there, so I have to make sure I get it all off. Okay, so you can see at like this doesn't look like much. This looks better, 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 and so on. And as we get across here, this really starts to look developed, other than the fact that we're looking at white paper for the highlights. Diane is asking, my masking fluid is getting thick in the bottle. How can I thin it down? Unfortunately, you can't. Once it starts to congeal and set, there's no unsetting it at that point. You're just going to have to replace it. Don't replace it with a large bottle. You're probably not using enough of it to get through the large bottle. So I would replace it. Unfortunately, that is the reality of masking fluid. if you save the scraped off masking and make a ball, it works as a removing tool better than the commercial one. Yeah, oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, the I tossed it in my garbage, but now I can't find it. It's yeah, that all that masking fluid that was kind of sticking together will work quite well. Actually, the other side of masking tape also works very well. Now, what do we do about all this white? So, generally speaking, the lightest or the newest grass is often, I won't say always, because it's not always the case, but often it is very green. In the case of these ones with the little seeds, sometimes those are a little brownish, so maybe a little bit of raw sienna or something like that. So let's say these little grasses in here, you might want to have those a little bit raw sienna. And you're going to come in and paint some of these. Now these ones at the top, it's just like the beginning of, you know, when we were masking these areas, you had to be very sort of slow and careful. All right, so in here you would have to be very careful with those little light areas, as you would have to be over here. I'm just using that script liner for that job. Rigger brush, whatever. Anything like that would work well. If you had any wildflowers, so if you had any like little yellows or whites or whatever, those you would leave white if they were white, or you would paint them yellow or whatever they happen to be, blue or purple or whatever. So I'll put in a couple of yellow flowers. I'll use some gamboge and make some yellow flowers like dandelions here or something. I didn't put too many in the foreground here. I probably could have or should have, but I didn't. But just to give the idea, you would put in those wildflowers before painting all of your grass. So for the grass, remember you want to start, you're kind of going back to the beginning where you're using nice, bright, fresher colors, because those are the things in the light. Color is always brighter and fresher when it's in sunlight. So I want to come in with bright, fresh color for a lot of these grasses. And the good news is you don't have to be like really precise and careful. You can, once you've determined where your wildflowers are, you can get pretty free with this, filling in the grasses. I'm going to go pretty yellow and pretty transparent as well. Don't put down heavy color. That would be kind of taking a step backwards. Let's go kind of yellowy here. And I'm even using this bigger brush, so you can see that just like it's easy to brush over top of this and get that effect. The darks are still there, and if you paint over some of the darks, this isn't going to show that much. So you can paint over things and you're fine. Keep it a light value and fresh color. I'm going to paint some little, I don't know, colors or something in there. I'm going to not make them all green. I want to make some variations in there. Matching in these brighter yellows. A little bit of the background color tends to mix into that, so even if you just painted yellow, some of the green sort of bleeds into it and turns it into a green. Once I get all of this green in here, all of the white areas covered, you'll see that it kind of looks like that's a continuation. Now, I've kind of continued it sort of up a hill, which is kind of weird, but I mean, if that were a dark cliff or a dark colored tree or something like that, these grasses at the top would really stand out. I'm kind of wishing I had done that a little darker. Can't go changing my mind now, but so do plan it out before you take off that masking fluid. Make sure you have your background well thought out. Picking up a few of those darks with my brush, so I have to wash it off every once in a while so I can pick up that clean color again. Okay, so you can see this looks fairly natural. The dense grasses here, you know, that starts to look pretty natural. If anything looks too stark, just take a little bit of a light wash and you can tone things down. So here, if I want to tone that down a little bit more, or even push something back into the shadows a little bit more, I can come in and just start brushing lightly. It'll spread the color that's already there, so it will push back into the shadows. Like if I came along the bottom here, I could make that really dark at the bottom. But I'd have to keep rinsing my brush if I'm starting to move out into other areas, because otherwise they end up all turning the same color. But you see, I can make that really dark, so you can create that sort of an effect where you have the grasses there. I want to take and use, let's use a little bit of maybe burnt sienna. Make this a little bit brown. And you would have to paint that as if you were normally painting it anyway. Pardon me? Make a couple of purple flowers maybe. Just remember, anything that you're sort of filling in where it was white, don't make it too dark. If you make it too dark, it starts to draw more attention. It doesn't feel like it's in the light. That's too dark. So I'll blot that with my paper towel. These ones are a little bit more pink than purple, but you want to keep the white of the paper coming through those colors so that they feel like they are in the light. If you want to add a shadow underneath, you could certainly do that. You know, if you wanted to pop a little shadow in there, that's certainly fine. All right, so you can see how you could really build that up, and you can use this for applying your masking, but don't discard the fact that you can also use a brush for that, because the brush can give you even more variations in your grasses, maybe bigger leaves, different kinds of plants, all those kinds of things. So a brush is also a really good tool for applying your masking fluid. And if you were closer, you'd probably want to use a brush anyway, because you wouldn't want them to be so fine. Yeah, it is a technique that requires some patience for sure, but also some planning, right? You have to think through what you're going to do with your background before you paint that in there. If I wanted to paint this background now, wow, I would have to paint around these darn things, and that would be really difficult. So, you'd have to think through those things before you actually take off that masking fluid. So I guess we'll just finish this one up and call this one a day, and hope you get a chance to try this. Let me know if you do try this and whether it works well for you or not. You might try it out and go, oh, forget this. I'm not trying this again. But try it once. I want you to try it once just to see how effective it is. Because the one thing that makes this look more natural than painting this with a fan brush is that it, you see, with the light background behind it, well, that's great if you've got a light background, but it doesn't make any shadows. So that isn't going to give me the look I'm looking for. Yes, it's fast, but it may not give you exactly what you're looking for. So to make it look natural and have the highlights on top of the shadows, which is the way things normally are, that's what I would recommend. So have fun with that one. I hope it works out for you, and we'll see you again. Oh, wait a minute. Next week. Next week is a little bit weird. I'm going to be away, but I have no idea what my internet's going to be like or whether I'm going to even get the opportunity. But I will try to be here next week again, and hope you'll be back for that. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Stay safe. Bye.